Alright, today we have another Bakugan discussion, another one of these BakuTech attribute discussions, this time on Aquos. Aquos is a strange one because it started off very, very slow. It was the last attribute to actually get proper representation within BakuTech with St. Aquos. It didn't come out like really that late or anything, just noteworthy that it was the last. Starting off though, we do have St. Aquos. St. Aquos was a really good Bakugan at the time. It could have 4 middle pieces. It was decently bulky and big, so it could also have some level of defense and occupancy, along with that attack. Plus you also had the smaller mode, which of course gave you the low G setup for this thing. So it did have some overall solid potential, was really good in the early days of BakuTech, and even by the end it was still like a decent option. However, after St. Aquos, there would not be another Aquos Bakugan for many, many months. The Bakugan we ended up getting was Killer Volca. When you haven't gotten a new release in forever, and this is also only your second one, Killer Volca is really not what you want. It only had 2 possible places for metal pieces, so it was just kind of mid for attack. Yes, Killer Volca Kage would come out later, but it still isn't really that good for that. And it was pretty mid for defense and occupancy. It does have this tail drop thing, but really, without a cross piece back there, that's just not doing much. It doesn't move the needle for Aquos at all, and yeah, I'm not going over every single Bakugan super in depth that they're not really relevant, and this one isn't. For Aquos' third release, we had Gift Shinryu. Aquos could finally have a full playable deck, and Gift Shinryu is really not the third Bakugan you want. One of the biggest problems with this thing is that it was a promo Bakugan. It would eventually receive a regular release, but that was a while later, and it wasn't relevant at all by then. Even at the time, Gift Shinryu wasn't great. You had 2 cross pieces. It's kind of bulky, so I guess it's maybe slightly above average for an attacker with 2 metal pieces, but still pretty mid. And while it is very large and decent for defense because of its size, its occupancy is nowhere near as good as it should be. It is far too high off the card to actually make a genuine difference. Any occupancy that this thing seems like it might have is really just an illusion. So again, Gift Shinryu really does not do much. And then a few months later we got Twin Dobru, and this thing was also not good. It had 2 cross pieces, not really a ton. This mode right here was its attack mode, and it didn't really do a lot. However, it does have 2 magnets, so what's the other mode? Well, it's this thing, which is supposed to be its defense mode and also its low G mode. This isn't good for defense, and also having a low G mode isn't a bad idea, but because it has 2 magnets, even if you're good at magnet positioning, just use St. Aquos at that point, because it's going to be a lot more reliable. So Twin Dobru also does absolutely nothing. Aquos was in really, really rough shape at this point. BakuTech had existed for over 2 years by now. Most other attributes at least had a somewhat playable deck, and Aquos really just didn't at all, not even close. And by this point it's also like halfway through the first real season of BakuTech, so it wasn't looking good. However, after this point, things actually do start to pick up for Aquos. Not long after Twin Dobru, we would get Dive Fujo. Dive Fujo has this little switch right here, which allows it to fall over, and this is a pretty good thing here. This means it has very good defense and occupancy, and was finally another actually usable Aquos Bakugan, and not just usable, it was actually good. And then a couple months after that we got Buddha Gil, a Bakugan that was very effective for curve shots, and upon opening had extreme pop-up force because of these parts right here being great attack points. So all of a sudden Aquos went from being absolutely worthless aside from St. Aquos to actually having a pretty solid deck within a couple months. You had a good occupancy Bakugan, a good attack Bakugan, and something that could do both while also having its low G stuff. Attack, defense, and a special function. Keep that in mind. Around the end of Season 1 we also got Sextabinal, which could be any attribute. If you wanted more attack, you could plug this thing into an Aquos deck and it would work. Maybe this, St. Aquos, Buddha Gil. Not the most necessary buff for Aquos by this point, but still a welcome one for sure. And then BakuTech Gachi started and everything changed. We got Gogaryu right away. Gogaryu is one of the strongest, most oppressive attackers in the game. Arguably number 1, really. You had these 4 metal blades, which added a solid bit of weight. Also, this metal horn here, which again adds a little bit extra weight. Opens up to be very big and also has a strong spring in the head there. This thing is just really, really good at attack all around. A very, very powerful Bakugan. It's also pretty large as well, and while it's obviously not like a defense occupancy Bakugan, it can stay on the card decently well while also, you know, taking up a fair amount of it. This Bakugan was absolutely ridiculous and a massive, massive buff for Aquos, immediately taking the attribute from being, well, pretty good to being arguably the best in the game out of nowhere. And it wasn't done yet because not long after this we got another good Aquos Bakugan. That being Bury Beyond. This thing is an incredible defensive Bakugan. It is a pure defensive stopper. Also, while it's not an occupancy Bakugan, it kind of has some occupancy traits to it as well. It kind of blocks a card off pretty well. Again, the back and stuff isn't really like that, but still, it does block and keep itself on the card pretty well. This is one of the best pure defense Bakugan in the game, and it was especially good in early BakuTech Gachi. By this point, Aquos was honestly just the best attribute in the entire game. It wasn't really close either. Pyrus did not have Dragon Dragon, Darkus didn't have a single 36mm Bakugan, and none of the other attributes were really even close to being on par with Aquos at this point. Gogaryu and Bury Beyond as a duo is just kind of crazy, and then for a third Bakugan you have a lot of options. St. Aquos, Budagil, Daifujo, Sextabnal. It's a pretty good roster at this point, really. After this though, Aquos wouldn't really keep its reign of terror going. That's fine, it was already a really good attribute, and we still get a couple extra pieces just because why not. You got Sea Slug, has 3 cross pieces, it can attack, it's also kind of bulky so it has some defense, okay occupancy, not the best Bakugan but something that does certainly work. Then there was Kotanker, this thing's just kind of mid, I'm not gonna lie, doesn't do much. And then we also got Goon Icarus. I kind of like this thing, but really by this point it's just not moving the needle for Aquos. There's just better stuff here. And if Aquos ended here, it's in a pretty good spot. You have 2 of the best Bakugan in the game, and quite a few options for that 3rd slot in the deck. But then Bakugan Armors happened. Bakugan Armors gave us a really good Aquos Bakugan in Hadokayo. While I think Yashitagaris is the best Bakugan in Armors, Hadokayo is definitely second, and I think you could still make a case for it being first. And that's thanks to its ability, Blow Away. Blow Away is one of the most ridiculous abilities in Bakugan. When you stand this thing on a card, you have the ability to point at an opponent's Bakugan, which can be anywhere on the field, does not matter how long it's been there, and they have to put it back in their hand. This can immediately just clear up the field from a larger defense occupancy Bakugan for free. It can completely ruin double stand setups, could free up your own cards if you want to use them for other stuff. It's just a big problem of an ability, and just makes Aquos even stronger. And by the end of everything, Aquos ends up being solidly like the 3rd best attribute in the game. You could honestly make an argument for it being second above Pyrus. I'm not that confident in saying that, but I wouldn't say someone's wrong for saying that either. Like, this deck right here is crazy. And again, it goes back to the idea that I mentioned. You have a great attack Bakugan, a great defense Bakugan, and then a 3rd Bakugan that has some kind of special, unique ability to it. Though this time instead of a Logi setup, it is Blow Away, which is far better, if we're being honest. And yeah, these 3 are just ridiculous. Again, Hadokai with Blow Away is great. Bury Beyond is one of the best defense Bakugan in the game. Gogaryu is in contention for the best attack Bakugan in the game. And then you also have some other solid stuff again. St. Aquos, solid attack, solid occupancy, plus some low G setups if you want them. Sea Slug is a decent all-arounder. Budagil is a really good attacker. Daifujo is a really good occupancy option. And then Sextabnal, which could just insert itself into any deck you really want. Aquos has some really good firepower. And it's really crazy to think about that because again, like I said, for the first 2 years of BakuTech, Aquos was barren. Beyond St. Aquos, it was not a good attribute, it did not look good. It seemed like it might be another Subterra or Ventus in terms of frequency, which of course that would not end up being the case, but really Aquos could have been one of the worst in the game, but somehow was able to redeem itself, get some crazy releases, and be the 3rd best, and again, I would even say being in contention for the 2nd best. Nothing beats Darkus, obviously Darkus is absolutely ridiculous, but Aquos has some really good stuff here, and I'm glad it was able to do well, as it does actually contain some of my favorite Bakugan. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Aquos. Really interesting attribute, especially with how, again, really started from nothing and ended up like this, so. Anyways, thanks for watching, and goodbye.